The phenomenon of human mail is nothing new. As a matter of fact, it's happened quite a lot throughout history. More times than you'd expect. And no, I'm not part of the next wave of prankster YouTubers trying to do stupid things like this, so let me just be clear and say, do not try this at home. Or anywhere. You know, just don't ship yourself anywhere in the world, because that's a ridiculously stupid idea. And if you keep watching, you'll probably realise why this is a very stupid idea, because most of these attempts don't end well. The reasons why someone would decide to do this do vary, as you will soon discover in today's very random video. Some people did it for the thrill of international shipping, others wanted to save money on travel expenses, whilst others did it purely out of necessity. This is Brainspill, my name is Tank, and today we're talking about people that have decided for whatever reason to ship themselves across the globe. And we are starting today with a man called Henry Brown. Henry Brown was an African-American slave in Virginia during the 19th century. Despite being a slave, he had a wife and children who all lived with him in this rented house. In such a situation, at least, if you have your loved ones with you, then you could stick together and hopefully see things through. One thing that you do need to know, however, is that his wife Nancy was also a slave. And the very backwards rules back then was basically that if slaves had children, then those children would become the property of the slave owner as well. Don't worry guys, not everybody in today's video is going to be a complete arsehole like these slave owners, just this one story. Brown had been paying his wife's master to not sell his family, but he basically betrayed his trust and decided to sell Nancy, who was pregnant at the time, alongside his 3 children to a different slave owner. Like anyone would, Henry Brown decided that enough was enough, and decided he needed to escape. Henry Brown conducted an audacious plan. He decided to try and escape to the northern states with a wooden crate. To say that this feat was mind-boggling is a bit of an understatement, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The journey began when Henry enlisted the help of local storekeeper and a sympathetic white craftsman to build a wooden crate measuring 3 feet long, 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide. He then prepared for his journey by collecting provisions including some water and a few biscuits. But most importantly, he had himself nailed into a box which was placed in the back of a wagon bound for Richmond. Just to get out of work for the day and be able to pull off this masterstroke of a plan, he had to basically burn his own hands with sulfuric acid to give them reason enough to not make him work. That is ridiculous, but like I said, desperate times calls for desperate measures, and sometimes it even counts that you've got to burn your own hands to get what you want. Oh, and if that's not abundantly clear either, don't try that at home either, because that is also a terrible idea. For 27 hours, he endured the agonising journey in a confined space, unable to move, breathe freely, or even knew where he was really going to end up on this massive voyage. The box also had a single air hole, making it quite the dangerous trip. It also didn't help that despite the box being marked fragile, his handlers were anything but, deciding to throw the box around with reckless abandon, leaving it upside down and generally not being handled in a very fragile manner. However, this long journey, as long as it was down many transported railroads, steamboats and wagons, it eventually made its way to its final destination. Yes, thankfully on this occasion he made it there in one piece, but I really wish that couriers were a little bit more careful with their packages. Look, I ain't saying that any packages I'm going to have delivered to my house are going to have live human beings in them, but I just wish that maybe they just pretended it did, because then they might take a little bit more care before they decide to boot kick my package over the back of my garden fence. I'm not joking, that's actually happened. After what must have felt like an eternity, the box was finally opened in the office of Philadelphia's anti-slavery organisation. Henry arrived and he was cramped and exhausted, but he was a free man, so at the end of the day, as arduous as this journey was, it was certainly worth it for Henry Brown. As you might imagine, he then lived a full life, becoming a lecturer after travelling his 350 miles out of state, and pretty much dedicating much of his life for advocating for the abolishing of slavery, which was a very noble deed. I mean, you wouldn't really expect anything less because this is somebody that had just come out of that life, so why not work to make it better for so many others? Whilst this is an incredible story of bravery and a feat of well, brilliance. This isn't the only time this has happened, and some of the instances I'm going to explain now are some of the more ridiculous times this has ever happened. Reginald James Spears, or Reg for short, was an Australian former athlete who competed in the javelin throw in the 1962 Commonwealth Games. However, in the following year he tried to qualify but was not able to gain admission to the 1964 Australian Olympic Games. Reg wanted to travel to England to try and qualify during the summer months. This was a bold move, and with doing this he had no real way of getting home. So much so that when he got there he was unsuccessful in qualification, but still had to get home somehow. So, what would you do in that situation? Would you maybe work a little bit to earn some money to actually be able to afford to go home? Maybe go to your local consulate and see if there's a way that you can get home that way? Or you could decide to take a one-way trip home in not only one of the most illegal ways possible, but also probably one of the most dangerous. Shipping yourself in international mail. Desperate to get back home in time for his daughter's birthday, and basically being penniless at the end of this season, Spears enlisted a fellow athlete to help build him a man-sized wooden box, in which he would then be air freighted all the way back to Australia. While successful, Reg almost died of dehydration when his box was left on a runway in Mumbai on the way back to Perth. His friend who helped him construct the box was concerned for his welfare, so raised the alarm to the Telegraph newspaper, who managed to eventually find the guy. Whilst Reg did make it home, people didn't exactly know how he pulled this off for quite some time, until he released a book about it, because of course he did. Anything like that, you want to make a few pennies off it whilst you can. Do you know what? If I was in a box on an airport runway in Mumbai, I would have just bailed there and then. I'd be like, well, Australia's pretty cool, but I'm going to make my home here because goddamn I'm not staying in this box any longer than I need to. It's, not for me, chief. Another man who we have to talk about today is known as Brian Robson, a man who was living in Australia in 1965. Fun fact, it's warm there. And if you're originally from Cardiff, Wales, this must have been quite a shock. Most people would have just boarded a plane to go home, but the difficulty is how you board such a plane when you have no money to do so. Inspired by Reginald James Spears, or our man Reg as we've previously described him as, Brian Robson decided to do something very similar and shipped himself in a wooden box which he thought would be a grand old idea. Robson and his friends sealed him in a crate that measured 36 by 30 by 38 inches and sent him back in the post all the way to London. Supplies in the crate included a hammer, a suitcase, a pillow, a litre of water, a flashlight, and a book of Beatles songs, along with an empty bottle. I think we all know what that empty bottle was for. Look, I know you're probably pretty bored on a trip like that, but I don't think cocktail making is something that you're going to be able to do or even have the luxury of travelling all that way in a box. Maybe a vodka piss and tonic, but you tell me. Robson's plan was to basically just be shipped directly to London on a 36-hour Qantas flight from Sydney, but the connecting flight was full. So the crate was left upside down for 22 hours on the tarmac until it was shipped by freight by Pan Am to Los Angeles before being transferred to London. He spent 92 hours in this crate before he was found by officials in Los Angeles, USA. Which just goes to show that on this occasion, he was found before he made it to his destination, meaning that if you tried this, there is a good chance that you'll get caught. Particularly these days, as some of these stories were quite a number of years ago. These things have got a lot more advanced since, and basically everything is scanned, and I'm fairly sure scanning a wooden crate and finding a human body in there is going to raise a few questions, let alone someone that was alive. He did have to spend some time in a Los Angeles hospital before actually managing to get home, and I imagine those medical bills were more expensive than his plane ticket, so yeah, as you can imagine, he also wrote a book about his story because he probably needed something to pay off that medical bill. I don't blame the guy, but maybe next time, just buy a ticket. This isn't just an isolated incident, as another occasion occurred in August 2012, where Hu Seng in southern China decided to ship himself to his girlfriend as a prank. It's just a prank, bro. What's the worst that could possibly happen? Well, in a totally unexpected step that nobody would have anticipated at all, He had some problems because whilst the delivery was successfully made, he almost suffocated in the box. I mean, if you only give yourself limited air holes and the box is too thick to punch through a hole of your own, it just sounds like something that if you're going to prank someone, you should test it first. Or maybe just not do it at all, but, well, your guess is as good as mine. He made it, and thankfully he did, because I imagine that being sent back or put in a warehouse for the next 90 hours is a terrible idea that nobody wants to have. So maybe lesson learnt, and maybe this prank wasn't all so funny in the first place. When he arrived at his destination, his girlfriend found him unconscious in a box, so paramedics were called. He seemed fine. I don't know if he wrote a book on it, but I imagine that if this had happened to you, then why not? I mean, everyone else has done it at this point. And that's it. Just a few examples of people doing stupid things, delivering themselves in packages that they probably shouldn't be doing. So I'm just going to reiterate this once more, that this should not be done at home or anywhere at all. Let's hope that these harrowing lessons might be able to convince a few people that the idea on paper doesn't sound quite as good if you actually do it for real. If you guys liked that video, here's another one just like it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.